Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is a briefing from www.central-mosque.com in a tradition of talking about the current affairs in the world, about the latest conflict, and this is 11th of July 2017 between India and China in Bhutan. Both of the countries with their militaries are only 120 meters apart and both refusing to back down. It continues with my tradition of talking about current affairs, particularly when it comes to India and China, because when you monitor the media of both countries, they both have their national interests, and both of the medias are lying through their teeth to present their position as the authoritative and the correct one. So this is my attempt to just bring some perspective into the conflict and what is actually going on between these three countries. So I said three countries, and you must be surprised and you must be asking, I thought the briefing was about India and China. So what's the story with three countries? The conflict is actually between three countries. It's Bhutan, India, and China. The region here is, there are actually three names for this particular region between Bhutan and China. The actual conflict has nothing to do with India. Geographically, we'll talk about political reasons in a second. So this particular region has been disputed between Bhutan and China for decades. It actually has three names. In the Bhutanese language, it's called Dokalam. In the Indian language, it's called Dokala. China calls it Donglang. So this is a border conflict, and each side's, whether you listen to Bhutan's story or Indian story or Chinese story, obviously they're going to try to assert sovereignty over this region. So we're just going to leave it aside and simply say it is a conflict between Bhutan and China. So China have been building roads and railways to its border areas quite aggressively over the last decade. So the Chinese roads are roughly 40 kilometers from this disputed border area. What China tried to do is they tried to build a road. It's only a 2-kilometer extension from this area into Bhutan. So this actually is disputed area. China says it doesn't belong to Bhutan, it belongs to China. So China tried to build a road. Indian army actually moved into Bhutan and checked this and stopped the Chinese civil government from building the roads and stuff. So Chinese military came in. So the two militaries are now stationed 120 meters apart from each other. So now why China building a road into a region which is a dispute between China and Bhutan? Why should it concern India? Two reasons. Reason number one, and this is the most serious reason. India is split actually. There's a part of India called the Northeast India. There are about 7 states in the northeast of India. This is the rest of India. Indian access to its own country, northeast, there's a little passage in between. It is called Siliguri Corridor or Chicken's Neck. Indian military strategists and Indian army thinks this is India's Achilles heel, i.e. in the case of a war, if this corridor is blocked, then India will lose access to all of this territory all around it. So here's Bhutan, here's Nepal, here's Bangladesh, here's India. In between this little tiny corridor. So India believes that by China building road access up to here, this territory is going to be in direct range of Chinese artillery, which cannot be allowed. So this is India's Achilles heel, and India will not allow this area to come within range of Chinese artillery. Now, taking back to 1947, when the British split India into India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and so on and so forth, Pakistan, or this area which was then called East Pakistan, today is called Bangladesh, had a distinct military advantage because it could block India's access to northeast of India. So it was within India's strategic importance to break this area of Pakistan or neutralize it at least in some way so they control access to their territory. And India did that in 1971, and today you have Bangladesh. So both Bangladesh and Pakistan lost quite significant military advantage. But nevertheless, now China is moving into this area, right here, disputed area, and India will not allow China to do that for the very same reasons, because access to the northeast of India will be blocked or compromised. Second reason, Bhutan has strategic treaties with India going back all the way to the end of 1940s. So Bhutan relies on India for military assistance and foreign assistance. So India has overread the whole agreement, and they believe that because Bhutan's sovereignty is in danger, then India needs to move on and protect it. So if we move back to the previous slide here, so because India believes that Bhutan's sovereignty is compromised, it is being affected, it is being endangered, India has moved its military straight across the border into Bhutan. Chinese simple argument is, hang on a second, this isn't your country. It's a conflict between Bhutan and China, not through India. So China is saying that you've crossed the international boundary into Bhutan to protect a nation. India's legal argument is, look, we have a treaty and the government of Bhutan has invited us, or in the past invited us, to protect their sovereignty. Bhutan is a tiny country, China is gigantic. So nevertheless, this is both sides of the argument. We're not going to argue the toss as to who's right, who's wrong. China is saying, back off India, go back to your land. India is saying, no, we have a treaty to protect Bhutan. This is what it's about. So two reasons. Number one is right here, India's narrow corridor to its own regions. If China positions its military and artillery here, it will be in direct range where they can actually fire or block, in case of a war, India's narrow corridor. Now, looking at a wider conflict, in this entire picture, the most interesting thing is Bhutan. This is Bhutan, and it has numerous territorial conflicts with China. So I've displayed you a picture where there are 2 or 3 different conflicts which are highlighted. The current conflict is right here. Okay, Bhutan is tiny compared to China. China is gigantic. So there's a thought in Bhutan to say, listen, we are surrounded on one side by a gigantic neighbor called China, on the other side a gigantic neighbor with India. Bhutan, there's a chain of thought in Bhutan, particularly after 2007, where they say that we don't want to depend on either one of them. We want to have a good relationship with either party. So we don't want to become a servitude state to India or in servitude to China. What China has done, they've offered Bhutan that basically we will take this little area right here, and in return we will give you a 4 times bigger area here up north. There is a chain of thought in Bhutan to go ahead and take it. The reason being is Bhutan knows that in the long term, if China ever decides to go to war with Bhutan, India, no matter how strict this treaty is, may not come to its aid. So the Bhutan is saying that, look, we have a good deal here. Give China this small region. This is, by the way, this is just a plateau with no significant importance whatsoever. All it's used for is herding sheep and cattle and stuff like that. So there's a chain of thought in Bhutan to say, look, give this small area to China and take this bigger area up north right here, which is a more strategic importance to Bhutan, versus this is nothing. So Bhutan, surprisingly, in this particular conflict has been very silent. If you monitor Bhutan's media, they are neither backing India nor China. Traditionally, Bhutan always backs India and the media back India. On this particular occasion, they've been very matter of fact. So this conflict, although is happening inside their own country, they're very silent. And that can be interpreted in a way of saying that they do not like India's aggressiveness. What they want to do is they want to handle this with China, because they realize provoking China in the long run is a very bad idea for Bhutan itself. So that's the thing with Bhutan. So India has crossed the border into a third country called Bhutan because they're saying that A, they have a treaty with Bhutan, B, they have a moral obligation to protect a small country against a big gigantic China. China's yesterday or the day before issued a statement and said, if India can enter an independent nation called Bhutan, then China can come right here and enter Kashmir if Pakistan invites. So India's argument is that Bhutan, the country, has invited us and we'll go in here. China is saying, fine, in that case, Pakistan can invite our military and we will be right here in Kashmir. So it's a tit for tat situation. Going back to my original picture where I've showed you this little small corridor, which is India's military Achilles heel. As a matter of fact, Indian media tries to portray this that basically by China coming over here, it will be in the direct artillery range. That is true. However, India's military position here is significantly stronger than China. The access from China is mountainous, it's rugged. You cannot really come into this region and position forces, versus India has been here since the 1940s. Couple of mountain divisions of India. So India is in a really strong military position. It's not like China is going to walk in and break India in half or something like that. That's not going to happen. However, it is a weaker position as far as the military is concerned. So if you think about it, from what I'm saying is China is in a weaker military position. So why is China doing that? Simple. India, based on its alliance with America and so on and so forth, has started asserting itself in the sea. So there's an area here in India. This is roughly hundreds of kilometers away from actual Indian shores. It is called the islands of Nicobar and Andaman. And what Indian Navy has been doing for the last couple of years has been building a military base and increasing their significant military capacity. What that does is this is basically right here. If you come from the Middle East, and I'll show you the next map, this is a very significant trade route. Over 60,000 vessels are within reach of this area of Indian Navy. 60% of Chinese imports go from this. Now let me superimpose the map and show you. So remember we talked about China's access to the Middle East oil. It's imports as well as exports to Africa and stuff like that. So you're coming from Saudi Arabia and this region, oil from China. China gets 60% of its oil from this region, and this is the Indian Nicobar and Andaman Islands. So this basically Indian Navy's positive or assertive stance puts Chinese trade directly at risk. So this is why China has been belligerent, and they want to put, so India wants to do this and China wants to do that right here to actually try to choke India this way or that way. The other thing that China can do is war over water. One of the biggest rivers in India is called the Brahmaputra River, and what it does, it actually comes from China. So the river goes straight down, then it bends on itself 180 degrees. It enters the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, which China thinks is their territory, flows into Bangladesh. China has already aggressively started building dams. Okay, if they build a dam right here, which is where the river bends, if they build a dam here, they can control the water flow into India and Bangladesh. So when there's no water, or in a drought season or something, they can stop it. When there's flooding in China, they can simply release the water into the Indian basin, into Bangladesh. Basically, they can wreak havoc with Indian people and Indian economy, and India will have no choice but to go to war over this, although this bend is directly into China. So eventually this will happen. Chinese appetite for energy, water and resources. One day, I mean, this basically, they keep building dams here. There is no international agreement. There's no water accord. Unlike between India and Pakistan, there's a water treaty where India and Pakistan have a deal as to how much water can flow. Basically, India can control the water flow into Pakistan. Here, China can do exactly the same to India and starve Indian people of water or flood Indian plains, either way. So coming back into conflict, if these armies continuously stay here in this small region, 120 meters apart, I don't think they're going to go to war. They're both not stupid enough to go to war. That's not going to happen. But what will happen is they will try to assert themselves somewhere else. And the only logical conclusion for India to do is to do so in the Indian Ocean right here. Okay, continue to assert itself. And what China can do, that's not a military thing. They can, every time there's a conflict between China and India, they keep bringing this topic up. So China will have no choice but to build a dam or something like that to deprive India of water. Let's watch this space and see what happens. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.